Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me is Thomas Harper, and we're going to talk about the Bad Batch episode, Rescue from Ryloth, because there's lots of military law issues here, in addition to general legal issues as well. Tom, how are you doing tonight?
I'm fantastic. I was a little slow. I just watched this episode today. Um, sometimes life gets in the way of my normal Friday morning at 4 a.m. watch party plans, but yeah, I'd say this show keeps impressing me, and when I think I can't be impressed more, another episode comes out and it's Friday again, and it just ups the ante, and I'm just really enjoying this ride.
They really good at making this show. I am very enamored with the storytelling, the way that they can bring in characters from either Rebels or Clone Wars. And in this episode, they did both. And that is phenomenal. Moreover, the story is engaging. And it's just absolutely God bless them for knowing how to deliver solid content.
Yeah, and the sign of quality to me is that if you've never seen, Clone Wars, Rebels, anything external to this show other than maybe the movies, it's a good enough show on its own. It can stand on its own 2 feet without that background. But the degree to which this weaves those stories together and really feels like a payoff for the investment of time that many fans spent by watching those other shows and consuming that other material, it just really feels good. It's there's nothing like the feeling of getting to the end of the episode and feeling like you got some stuff that was written in there for the folks that were longtime fans of Clone Wars or Rebels or whatever else. Not to exclude other fans, but just to say, if you're invested in the more connective tissue of the universe and the other aspects of the story that are out there, there's going to be some in there for you, so to speak. And I just love that about this story. And this is one of the greatest examples of this, that storytelling art being done really well.
Agreed, because you never seen 5 years of Rebels and the 6 to 7, depending on how you count, of Clone Wars. And it's like, okay, Hauser, who we briefly saw for a short arc in Clone Wars, was that season 2, maybe 3, something early, with their Ryloth campaign, to Hera, for again character from Rebels for 5 years, and it made me want to go back and watch the episode where she went home, and because I remember one talking about her dad, and it's like, okay, that's 15 years in the future from where we are right now and is this story. So it's like, okay, what's going to happen? Because again, there's a lot. There's a lot, and I'm curious to see if we'll eventually see her in live action, whether it's the Ahsoka show or Mandalorian season 3, or there's a whole bunch of options, and it could come out of nowhere. Like maybe it'll be Rogue Squadron. I'm like, there's all these possibilities for seeing this animated character and how it could come to the big screen, or it's also, and I don't know if I prefer Star Wars TV at this point. Like, it's like it actually paused. It's like the TV shows have been really superb.
We get a lot more content there.
And they're able to go deeper with characters and explore characters and have fun with a way that they don't always get to do when it comes to other shows. And, again, we'll see what they do. We'll absolutely see what they do. Now, this episode had so many big legal issues. And to kick it off, we have the Syndulla's mom and dad, who've been falsely arrested for the claimed assassination or assassination attempt of Senator Ta, who the Empire outright lies twice. One, that it was the Syndulas who attempted an assassination, and then that the senator would recover when, Crosshairs shot him in the head. He's dead. He ain't coming back. You don't get better from that.
Although I don't know if was Rampart lying to the I don't know if it was a message to the public or who, but saying that he was recovering and he was going to be just fine. Might want to, yeah.
Why? Why do? Because that lie can be disproven.
Yeah, he still hasn't come back. I remember that one day you told us, oh no, that little thing. Oh no, tragically he succumbed to his wounds. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
After getting shot in the head, like he didn't get better from that. We thought he was that kill shot to the brain, but apparently, just it was just a scratch. So when it comes to arresting people, you have to have, in our view of the Fourth Amendment, you need to have probable cause. You state the charge against those who are being arrested. They eventually get to go before a magistrate or a judge, for their arraignment, and they can challenge, the evidence against them. We've skipped all of that, and it's just them in a prison cell, and the Empire's rounding up others who could be sympathizers or just known associates of the Syndulas, the people who help liberate the planet from the separatists. That's just not legal. I'm like, we really don't need to get into more analysis, but this is full on police state. This is very, Third Reich, or Imperial Japan or Soviet Union, or, anything from the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War, of just throwing people into prison cells. Except this gulag approach is being done for a propaganda purpose to try to discredit the Syndulla name.
One of the things that I think we'll spend some time on this episode, and that directly affects the legal analysis here, is the question of whether Ryloth is under occupation by the Galactic Empire. And I don't mean that like I mean the technical legal term occupation, and that term has legal weight, legal meaning. In fact, under international humanitarian law, the law of occupation is effectively its own field, because once an occupation is deemed to have started, not that you need an official declaration, but once the conditions are met and legally there exists an occupation, it spawns or it triggers a whole set of legal requirements between the occupying power, in this instance, the Galactic Empire, and the occupied territory, Ryloth and the Twi'leks. And so, but at its base, like Josh, you talk about sort of the core fundamentals that we look at for what makes for a lawful arrest, and what has to happen once somebody is detained. In the U.S. and at least under our structure of laws, you can't just be detained and nobody tells you what you're charged with, and there's no moving of the ball forward in terms of the legal process. Things have to happen. There's a right to a speedy trial. There's all sorts of things that you've touched on in your bit. Those don't just magically go away just because an occupying power is in place. And first and foremost, the business of needing to tell somebody what they've been arrested for, what they've been charged with, if they've been charged with some sort of actual crime, that doesn't go away. That can't be set aside. And so for the Syndulas, the problem is that they did attack an Imperial convoy. Like I don't know that anyone was killed, any Imperial troops were killed, but while they may have had a defense in why they attacked the Imperial convoy. The fact remains that they did assault that convoy. And so I think the grounds exist for the Imperials to arrest them, but that's pretty much where the Imperials have went off the road in terms of their legal requirements. The fact that they have the ability to arrest them doesn't give carte blanche to just ignore all the rest of the rights. They've got to move the case forward. Effectively, what they're doing is using him as a political hostage and a bargaining chip in hopes of bringing Hera out so that they can have the entire Syndulla family in custody.
Which again goes to, you want to arrest a kid, and there are rules with how that's done. And so they are the bad guys for a reason. And Rampart is really leaning into that for, let's just show them how bad we are with what we're going to do here. So yeah, not a lot to unpack. This is wrong. It's just, and it's important to explain why. And they've completely disregarded our Constitution, like in how we view due process. And when it comes to the law of war, you're just rounding people up. And so it's, as the Red Cross guy, like that should be raising a bunch of red flags for you.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but in order for all the things that I said to really matter beyond the core legal issues about arrest and whatnot that we discussed, there's got to be an occupation. And the tricky thing here is that like the legal definition under at least the Hague Convention, or the Hague Regulations rather, is that a territory is considered occupied when it's actually placed under the authority of the hostile army. Well, the issue here is that the Empire, which just magically came into existence from the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, they were a friendly force. They were there on Ryloth at the invitation of the Twi'lek people in an effort to liberate that planet from the Separatists. This goes to the core of Hauser's like crisis of conscience, how quickly they morphed. And at least public facing, they're not a hostile army. It's almost a situation of Iraq or Afghanistan and the United States being present. In both cases, we're there at the invitation of, in Afghanistan, it's the sort of continuing invitation since the formal government didn't exist. That situation was different when that theater started off. But Iraq's a cleaner example. We're there at the invitation of the Iraqi government. Obviously, we didn't change roles and become a galactic empire at any point since 2003 in that case. But the empire, at least behind the scenes, has become this evil thing. And the Twi'leks are only starting to realize this in spurts. And it's almost like Rampart's job, beyond mining the planet for Death Star materials, is to keep the people from realizing that suddenly the bad guys are in charge. So I don't know if it meets the definition. I think it probably does, but the Twi'leks don't know that they're hostile yet. Unless your name's Syndulla.
Yeah, but I think a historical comparison could be post-World War II with the Soviet occupation of Germany and any of the Eastern Bloc countries, because they go from liberators to occupying army within a short span of, it depends how you want to count it, because Stalin and the Russian army weren't exactly good to the German people. There was a lot of let's get even in the liberation of Berlin. And there was a reason why, Germans wanted to surrender to the Americans and not to the Russians, because the Russians just butchered people. So I think it's more along the lines of that. And I think the Soviet Union's a good comparison, but after World War II, because the Eastern Bloc doesn't happen overnight. that could be, like the Iron Curtain speech by 47. I think that's when Churchill gives that, but I could be wrong. This is what happens when you take lots of history classes and you're just trying to remember everything, as opposed to just typing into Google Churchill Iron Curtain speech. Back in the old days, we just tried to remember stuff. Anyway, I think that's probably the fair comparison, but this is happening within like a month or two of the end of the, so
they're just celebrating. They're just like at a big like rally cheering on these great clone troops. But I think you're spot on that legally, when we talk about occupations in the real world, there doesn't have to be shooting for there to be an occupation. And hostile doesn't necessarily mean an opposing force that you were just fighting. It can mean the an unwelcome presence. If I have to think that in Iraq, if the Iraqi government had made an official plea or a request for the United States to leave and exercise their sovereignty and said, we don't, invitations revoked, U.S. forces aren't welcome here anymore, and we stayed, I don't know that it was all that relevant that we were first in there to assist them at that point. And I think that's sort of a situation that we have here, where hostile doesn't mean just one thing, and the Empire certainly doesn't have Ryloth or the Twi'lek people's interest in mind.
Because again, they're the bad guys, and they're and proud of it. It's like some of us are going to wear black, some will wear gray, and just to show how that we're bold conquerors, some are going to wear white, and they're the ones who do the dirty work.
Yeah,
that's serious. So that's issue 1, and that's the first 45 seconds of the episode. But you raised the issue on our outline, like there are reprisals taking place. Can you highlight those? Because again, I'm the civilian attorney. You're the guy who's been and worn a uniform and been deployed places.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how you look at what they're doing to the Twi'lek people, and we don't have although as much as I wish we had like a 4-hour episode where it just shows everything that's going on, Hauser is really your only look into what's happening beyond this Imperial headquarters at the Capitol there. But he speaks of civilian roundups. It sounds very much like the Empire is casting a very wide net. Anybody who knows Syndulla, who's been in a Facebook photo with Cham Syndulla, who gave him a high five once at a Free Ryloth movement softball game, they're all being detained. And that could be seen as a reprisal, in the sense that if you have a particular political belief, so if you align with the political views of, or you're loyal in any way to this political figure in Cham Syndulla, then you're going to face some punishment, whether that's an extended detention or whatnot. The Empire is doing this, and they're trying to stretch the right that the legal right that an occupying power has to take certain measures and set certain laws of the occupied territory aside for reasons of security. But they've stretched it too far here. You can't just use that. And the Empire is classic for this, is, hey, it's all in the name of securing the Empire. This is for peace. That's why we're doing this. I just love that. The line that jumps to mind is in Rogue One between Krennic and Galen Erso, where Erso snaps back and says, "I think you're confusing peace with terror." And I think that's what they're rapidly going towards here. They have this really central objective, which is to eliminate Syndulla's influence across the planet and tamp down on any resistance. And to do that, they're going to use the biggest net possible. And when you get into punishing folks for their political beliefs, that's a reprisal, and that's not allowed under occupation law. And you can't wave the banner of security to justify that sort of thing.
The bad guy.
You got to stay in character.
They lean in, and they really lean in. This, so turning to Hera becoming the character that we will recognize in Rebels. One, it's interesting with her voice having not just being younger, and it's Vanessa Marshall voicing her again, but adding what almost sounds like a French accent. Did you detect that, or am I just going crazy?
No, you're spot on. And in fact, the episode of Rebels that you mentioned, where she goes back home, there's a moment where she has that accent when she's pretending to be a servant around her own house, and she sort of begs and pleads innocence. And then there's a moment later in the series where she's back with her father, and her father's obviously got some different aims from the Rebel Alliance. And as she's arguing with him, she slips back into that accent as well. And I thought the moment I heard it, I was like, that's an amazing callback, because she's almost got this not adopted persona, because she's still herself when she's out with the rebellion, but she's lost a little bit of herself in terms of like the need to have this more standard sounding voice. Almost if you were, like I'm from the South, from North Carolina. I've never had a particularly strong accent except when I was a kid. But if you were to move somewhere and if I did have a strong Southern accent and I say, well, I probably need to drop that because that might cause an employer not to hire me if they hear me and think, man, this guy is not educated based on how I talk, or something like that. And so it's a good ear of yours. And that's one of those neat little callbacks that really meshes the universe or the galaxy of these stories together that I really like.
So I'm going to have to watch that Rebels episode again, because it's been a few years since I've seen it.
Yeah.
Two, I'm glad I'm not like hallucinating that she has a Franco accent. Three, that does make sense. I have a friend from scouting she's now a naval officer, and from Louisiana. And I remember get a couple drinks in her, and her Cajun accent.
Creole comes out.
Yeah, it's like, there it is. So, like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
People do that, or like when they're from Georgia and they go visit Atlanta, that it comes back. And so, okay, that totally makes sense. I am not surprised with that. That said, so Chopper's going for MVP here.
As always.
Yeah, I mean, he is a strong second to R2. I mean, and I think that's just because his only live action appearance was a cameo in Rogue One. But the amount of times that Chopper saved the day now in 2 different animated series continues to be impressive. And the fact he's less grumpy in this, because by the time of Rebels, he's a very grumpy droid. And theoretically, like, this should be not too long after the Y-wing crash that he was in that gives him PTSD. Like, that hasn't fully manifested. So that's kind of an interesting spin on this. But we basically have 2 ways of looking at the call from Hera to the Bad Batch. One, it could just be seen as a plea for help. 2, it could be seen as an invitation to contract to go save her parents. Which category do you think this falls under?
I think it depends on it depends on the party that you're viewing it from. I think to a certain extent. I think from the Bad Batch's perspective, it's absolutely an oral contract. At least when they start the job, they expect payment. They don't come to terms on the exact amount. It's one of those like Han agreeing to rescue Leia situations where it's like, it'll be more well than you can imagine kind of thing. Like my parents are somebody here on this planet. They will get you some money. Just do the job. So in their minds, there's consideration for their services, and in their mind, the services rendered are about to be significant considering the odds and the risk that they're undertaking. And so, yeah, I guess as I think this out loud, Hera probably thinks that they have a deal too, because the consideration of them rescuing her parents, there are multiple points where Hunter starts to get bad feet. Thinking Bad Batch too much. Cold feet about the whole mission, and she tries to sort of enforce the terms of the deal or modify. At one point, she offers to pay them double to continue on with the mission, sort of a contract modification. So, yeah, I think you've got an oral contract here. I wonder whether I think the statute of frauds would probably kick in, and you'd probably need this reduced to writing in some form, because I can't imagine they're agreeing to do it for a pittance.
Also have the big issue of she's under 18.
Very true.
So is she legally competent to enter into a contract? And that raises all kinds of issues, because it's not like this is like a 25-year-old with diminished capacity.
Right.
It literally is a 12-year-old, like maybe 15 at most.
Mm-hmm.
She's not that much older than Omega, and Omega is 8 to 10. Like Hera's got to be 12 to 14 at best.
Right.
Because they're close in age. Even though Hera does have, some height on Omega, they definitely bonded, and so there's a commonality of interest. Because like a 15-year-old wouldn't like befriend an 8-year-old. That's just kind of weird. Like you don't expect that, but like a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, absolutely. Like that's passes the sniff test of, is this a believable story? Yeah, I do think that we have more of a, well, it's a complex issue, because the call could be seen as just a call for help, because she's not offering payment or anything like that. She's like, come save me, could be one interpretation of that, which was the offer, like, come on, kid, we're just rescuing kids now, so hop aboard. To the other extreme of, no, I want to go save my parents and I'll pay you for it. I think we have two different levels here, and I think it's reasonable that they could land in either direction. So there's that. Then we get to the actual mission to go save mom and dad. We have Hera and Omega, both minors, taking an Imperial shuttle for a flight and use of weapons to blow things up. This is underage flying, so there are rules with how old you can be to get a pilot's license. She's clearly a minor, and she's not flying with someone who's a licensed pilot acting as an instructor. So we do have a big issue of underage flying. But there's possibly a good necessity defense, because we're now not dealing with normal civilian type operations. This isn't a kid taking a Cessna 150 for a joyride. This would be like
It's like the equivalent of a kid stealing a Chinook.
Yeah, and doing a mission with.
Yes.
It's like, okay.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to draw back to my law school experience. I think that's what we call frowned upon would be the legal term. Heavily frowned upon.
We don't want the kid taking the Cobra gunship for a spin and blowing stuff up. But she's trying to do this to save mom and dad against an occupying force that's illegally holding her parents. So we're stepping outside of the rule of law or civil society, and we're entering into more of a law of war situation. But that does raise that they're child soldiers at this point in time. So there's a little bit of that. And then you get into the issue of, is this reckless flying? Because that's a thing. And in one of the Rebels posts that we did, we did get into reckless flying with a TIE fighter. I think it was Zeb and Ezra who take a TIE fighter for a spin. And yeah, it's like reckless flying at that point. Anything jump out at you with use of military aircraft?
We've talked about theft of government property before, and presumably this. You talk about the grand scale of things. She's not stealing a pair of night vision goggles here. The theft of a military aircraft here probably involves, not only is it a highly dangerous piece of equipment. I mean, I joke about the Chinook situation, but she steals a cargo shuttle. It's analogous here, and that would be unthinkable here. If you read that sort of story on the front page of your newspaper, you'd think like, oh, that kid's in a lot of trouble, understandably so. And she's doing it. I think the theft of it is serious enough, were it just for a joyride. But here it's part of a hostile act against the Empire, because just because Hera doesn't pull the trigger and destroy anything at that refinery doesn't mean that she's not committing a hostile act. So she's really it's a good thing that this mission succeeded, because she's putting herself, her protected status as a civilian is out the window as she's participating in this attack. And, that has obvious ramifications on her immediate safety. The Empire would be fully within its rights to open fire on the shuttle and take it down. But she's endangering a lot more than just herself. And by that, I mean a lot more than just even Omega in the co-pilot seat. Obviously that they really had no other choice in this situation. But there's a cascading series of dominoes. I think we're going to see those play out, because what's going to come of this escape writ large is going to be much more than just Cham Syndulla able to go do his thing. I think the Rampart and the rest of the Imperials there on Ryloth are really going to crank down hard because of this operation and this embarrassment.
Agreed. It also raises the issue of the legal justification to attack the Imperial mining facility. And I think we can explore that and under several different theories. One, let's just view this as combat, and it's an occupying army. That mining facility is a military target because it's got 4 or 5 autocannons to shoot down aircraft. It's run by the military. The way that people are brought in, it's like, look, this is gainful employment. Is it? Is it? I mean,
you really do have a choice to work here. Wink, wink.
Yeah, it's like, this isn't Schindler's List. Like, this is more von Braun and with using people for building V2s. Like, it's a very different beast. but they are getting paid, but it's for the Imperial war machine. So I don't think it's I think it's a clear military target. So I don't think there's an issue with like this is a civilian. It's not blowing up the baby milk factory, which again, the Iraqis claimed that during Gulf War One when they put up signs in English over a military target that said this was a baby milk factory. And again, we weren't stupid. It was this clearly they're mining for war, and I think the gun turrets and soldiers highlight that this is a target. Any thoughts on the legitimacy of this as a military target?
No, the question comes down to who has legal authority to attack, and it gets into a real sticky legal situation that we could probably spend the entire podcast on in terms of the legal status of the Twi'leks. There's even the status of Cham's forces. I mean, he was effectively like a warlord of sorts. He had sort of inherent authority, but he wasn't an elected leader. That's Orn Free Taa, the senator who had that position. Cham just happened to have clout amongst the people, and his status as a war hero from other efforts sort of gave him a position of authority, de facto authority, and he sort of stayed in that position because his influence grew, and he had influence over a lot of people that were willing to fight and had combat experience. It's the whole reason the Empire played nice with him when they switched over from the Republic. That we saw that play out earlier this season. So without going down that entire rabbit hole, I think you're absolutely right. It's a clear-cut military target. The question of whether the Empire even has a right to conduct that mining is another question. You don't get, as an occupying power, to just come in and take private property. We have a lot of facts that are missing here that would be necessary for a full analysis there. But the Empire might have some right to mine. And if you missed it in an episode or two ago, they're mining dunium, which is one of the primary metals used for the Death Star. So they have a clear military use for it, and that's allowable in some circumstances. But again, it's a factory that's producing war material, if we get right down to it. So, yeah. Anyhow, one day we'll do a whole Law of War podcast
and bring in a few other JAG officers.
That's right,
for the fun. The other issue with Ryloth is the lack of government. And if you're aware of background facts, please share them, because I haven't read every comic or book that might get into this. But the only elected leader we see is a senator. Senators don't have executive authority. They might have some influence, and they can send a mean-spirited letter to a federal agency to go like, hey, why isn't this person getting their benefits? Like, there's that sort of thing that senators do. But we don't see anyone who was a president or prime minister, like administrative heads, all the other things that you would expect in a government. This is, one level, might be a libertarian dream of, we got no government here. It's just people with guns. And so we're super free market here. We got a problem, we shoot each other. It's like, that's not a good government. I mean, that's not stable. So I don't know if the separatists did a decapitation strike during the Clone War that knocked out the civilian government, which is why the only people you see with any sort of command responsibility is through prestige, and one senator to the Republic, now Empire. And that just strikes me as odd, because governments can contract and have treaties with other governmental entities. This seems to imply a void. And while Rampart was, big in the prior episode about, all the great imperial jobs that we have for you, how did that come about? Was it just simply a senator, negotiating a contract or a treaty with the empire? It's just very odd that we have this big power vacuum and that the freedom fighters, like, they're not uniformed. Like and I don't know if that meant they didn't have a standing army or the standing army got wiped out. Like, what happened here? Do you have any background on that?
Yeah, we don't have much on the internal governmental structure of the Twi'leks or of Ryloth. Cham certainly was never an elected official. My very general description of his status is about the framework of what we know, and that's sort of like classic Star Wars, right? Like, you've got your senator on Coruscant, but we're not going to give you just that. That's all you need to know. They've got representation. They're a good guy planet. Don't worry about what's going on the planet there. But it's not like Orn Freytau's the senator and Cham is part of like some, he's like the king of Ryloth or anything, not like that. Interestingly, I learned this. I quickly looked it up. The Empire classed Ryloth as a protectorate, so a system that's under or being extended the protection of Imperial forces, but remains autonomous. And I use very heavy air quotes around autonomous, since I think they quickly realize they have zero autonomy whatsoever. They have the semblance of autonomy, but that's about it.
It's really weird. I mean, again, just lawyer hat and thinking, how are you functional? I mean, it's one thing if you just have, there's cities, there has to be public services like trash pickup and running water. It's not like this is frontier land. Even though their cities do seem to be on top like of plateaus. And that's a curious way to do urban development. Like, where do you get water? I mean, like, do you want that to flow uphill? I mean, like, how's that work? You're not downstream of anything. Like, how does sanitation work? Or you just have incinerators in houses and, we don't worry about, septic tanks or plumbing or anything like that. How's their refresher work? Because all of that goes to the nature of a local government. And that seems to be missing here. Again, I don't think we'll get answers to that. They're not writing these episodes for guys like us curious about, what's the local government here? Do they have a mayor and a city manager? Like, how's that work?
How are you all subdivided? Do you have a zoning committee here, or what's going on with your city planning?
Because it's like San Francisco. It can't grow, like, because it's atop the peninsula. Like, it's like, and we're not going to go fill it in. So they have laws. I think Measure M from the 80s was put a cap on how tall buildings can be, even though there's at least one exception to that now. But again, that's local government, and it's a curious issue on how does this work. Now the last issue that I want us to get into is one that was actually shared by Judge Matt Trino from New York, with all of the Hauser's men, a good number of them, saying, we're not going to go shoot, Twi'lek people anymore. And they lay down their arms and they get arrested. This is a nice model for I'm not following an illegal order. And just wanted to get your sense on that and to dive into what is an illegal order And the fact that they were supposed to be liberators that are now occupiers, rounding up innocent people. Did these troops handle this the right way?
I thought this was one of the best moments of any Star Wars show. Um, it it was a callback to me internally to the feelings that I had watching that episode of the Clone Wars, where that Basilisk Jedi Pong Krell with the forearms, he ends up being a traitor, has aligned himself with Dooku, and ends up pitting clones against clones, and they don't even realize it on Umbara, the darkness of on Umbara arc of the Clone Wars. And ultimately, Rex leads a mutiny against him, and they all get arrested and sentenced to summary execution. And I won't spoil the rest. But in any event, there was a sort of classic moral clash there. And, what do we do under these circumstances? I thought it was a real interesting and creative way to handle it here, because Rampart could have easily taken up arms, gotten a couple guys on his side, and done the sort of classic shoot 'em up thing, and let me blast my way off the planet with you guys, and I'll just become one of the crew. But instead, he takes a huge risk going out. He knows that there's a squad of his own men ready to fire. He opens the door. He knows probably that Crosshair's on Overwatch and could easily put a blaster bolt into him. And yet he makes this impassioned speech in a plea to their moral core, and throws down his weapon and just hopes that they'll do the same. And I thought this was just a really great example of a way that in an extremely tense, volatile situation, you have somebody handle it with their moral compass front and center, instead of this combative mentality and, everything needs to be answered with a blaster bolt kind of idea. And I thought it was really touching. I think it ended up clearly working for him, because a number of those clones threw down their arms. But he does that knowing that he's not going to get out of there, that ultimately, he could have gone the route of suicide by assault on Imperial forces in a blaze of glory. But his paramount interest was in bringing his men back over to the right side of things, even if that meant steering them straight into a really uncertain future where they're, classed as traitors to the Empire. So, yeah, I love the moment.
Exceptional storytelling, because it's not Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid of like, or Thelma and Louise, we'll keep going. Like, it's not that. It is, it's not a blaze of glory. It is, we're supposed to be the good guys. He clearly is not afflicted by the inhibitor chip. Because he's
interesting.
Yeah, he's showing lots of free will, and like no fanatic behavior, and that probably means he's more that first generation, and he's in the category that it just didn't affect him. And right. Also raises the issue: were there any Jedi on Ryloth at the end of the war? Because maybe none of them participated in Order 66, even though it was issued. Did they not hear it, or did it not affect them?
Right.
Or the fact that we're not dealing with Jedi, we're dealing with the people they fought to protect. It's again like picking on the Afghanistan example. Like, we, after 9/11, when we go into Afghanistan, President Bush made sure that we were airdropping food and while conducting military ops, that we wanted to save people in addition to taking out the Taliban. And with women voting and women going to school, like, imagine doing all of that, and then we do a hard turn and go like, let's just do what the Taliban did in summary executions in the football stadium. And that should give everyone pause for what the hell? Like, and well, they weren't doing summary executions. They were rounding people up. And that probably got a bunch of them thinking that we didn't sign up for this. And there's a healthy number that throw down their arms and choose to get arrested. I'd be interested to go back and count the percentage. But that has to have an impact on internal morale, because what do you do when your fighting force is going like, yeah, we're on the wrong side and I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm just going to leave in the middle of the night.
Right.
How many guys are doing that and going to go find Syndulla? And like this raises the issue that the best way to recruit for the rebellion is from the clone army that's not cool with what's going on.
Yeah, just look for clones who still have their armor painted. That seems to be the measure there. It's legally precarious, though, to bring it back to our core wheelhouse, because we've talked about lawful and unlawful orders before. And legally, all orders are presumed lawful because they have to be. That's just how the system has to operate. Now, obviously, like an order to kill civilians is going to very quickly, it's going to lose that presumption very quickly. That's just the starting point on the game board, right? Because if every soldier has to immediately go through a flow chart and figure out whether they should, follow every single order, that's just there would be chaos. There'd be no order or discipline in the system. That said, and there are a number of factors that make an order lawful, and for the tricky thing for goodness, I've gone and blanked on his name right now. But the tricky thing for the clones here is that you're walking into a scenario having leveled your judgment on a situation, and you're up against that legal presumption. And so it's going to take a trial, and in this case, by probably a prejudiced body, not an impartial and fair proceeding, I would wager, to suss that out. And I don't know that in this situation there's going to be an argument on both sides. The Empire, the prosecutors are going to make an argument that Hauser, there's his name, I don't know why that flew out of my brain when it did, but that Hauser and his men had a duty, that the job of rounding up known accomplices of Cham Syndulla, and in some cases folks who were actively plotting against the Empire, was a valid order. And the fact that they didn't like it, or that they started out as allies of the Twi'leks, really wasn't relevant. So it'd be one thing, I think, if they were pulling it like a Janna from Rise of Skywalker and saying, I'm not going to fire on civilians. That's like a My Lai massacre scenario where it's very clear cut, and you need to take some action there. This one, I wouldn't call it quite a gray area, but it's tap dancing on that line. And I can certainly see the argument from the Empire side, as wrong as it may ultimately be. But yeah, but that's all the more reason why it took a heck of a lot of courage, because he knows he's not going to go in, nor any of his comrades, and get a fair shake. They're going to be branded. They're going to be trotted out and made examples of.
Unless enough of them, we go for the Gandhi types. People aren't like, no, this is wrong, we're out. That's a lot of guys to flip. And you get into the standard for an illegal order should be objective on its face. They weren't doing like a My Lai type massacre, but they were doing things that should have gotten everyone very concerned about what's going on here. We just fought with this guy, and now we're rounding up innocent people. I'm like, it'd be an interesting trial, if there was an unbiased jury. And it's definitely grounds for General Syndulla to go like, maybe we should go get these guys who could be super helpful
Yeah.
to us. I mean, it also raises, a historical example. And today's July 18th, which is the anniversary of the Massachusetts 54th assault on Fort Wagner in the Civil War, which is depicted in the film Glory. And for all of its mistakes, it is, in my opinion, one of the best Civil War movies of all time. It's the gold standard. And in that story, in that historical account, the Confederacy did not take kindly to the idea that formerly enslaved people or free blacks were being put into uniform to fight. So they issued a proclamation that whoever we capture in uniform, we'll kill or put back into slavery, and we'll kill the white soldiers with them. And President Lincoln's reaction to that was, what you do to our guys, we'll do to yours. And Fort Pillow, which was a battle where the Confederates massacred American soldiers. And the funny thing happened to afterwards, the other Union soldiers ignored the fact that the people who were killed were African American. And remember, Fort Pillow was used in beating the crap out of Confederate POWs because murdering fellow soldiers did not go over well in the Union Army. So when we look at Fort Wagner, it's one of the linchpins of history in our history, because it was Gettysburg is July 1 to 3, Vicksburg Falls July 4th. You have the New York, the first Union draft take place on July 11th. July 12th, you get the New York Herald publishing all the names of everyone who had just been drafted, followed by all the names of people who just died at Gettysburg. And New York exploded into a horrific race riot with the Irish going in and killing African American people. And it was the Union Army sent in by Lincoln that put down the rebellion in New York. And that ends by July 15th. July 18th, we have this heroic last stand trying to take out this Confederate fort. And Robert Gould Shaw, dies in that battle. The soldiers in the 54th included Frederick Douglass's sons, and in others who were, grew up free in Massachusetts. The Confederates stripped the bodies of everybody and buried them in mass graves. They were abhorrent. They did things that would be illegal under the laws of war. And no one said no to that. Take our story. Again, we have something horrible taking place with an empire, and you start seeing soldiers saying no, this is the wrong thing to do. So one, it's important to remember our history as we think about these stories and what we're looking at and what they can be pulling things from. But it's also important to never forget the 54th and what this day means, because it was after this, that slaughter of a battle where Lincoln said, we're going to make sure that African American soldiers are paid the same. And if you're willing to fight and die for this country, you should be able to vote in it and live in it. So the idea of we will just deport Black people to South America where they can, not bother us anymore, that died. That died because it was a realization that everyone here is an American. So I always feel that way around this time of year. But
that's a great callback. It's a great tie-in.
Yeah, thank you. Just seeing soldiers trying to do the right thing when they could end up dying from it. So with that, Any other thoughts, Thomas, on what we might be seeing in the future?
No, that was a beautifully poignant place to end it,
Okay.
I think.
We shall. So everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and above all else, stay geeky. You all take care.